Wanted to do a deep dive here. It's just something I use with AI, a system called Notebook LM, and I did a research paper with ChatGPT that was be able to basically get all of the information I was looking for from. I downloaded a bunch of different autobiographies and memoirs from the previous presidents of the United States, and researched on, just what their thoughts were in private about kind of the influence of the state of Israel and the lobby and geopolitics. And so I haven't listened to this yet. I just I have one source here. You can add numerous sources to this AI system, PDF files. You can attach links to YouTube to videos, like for like documentaries or something. But this is just from the research paper. So
Okay, let's unlock some hidden history and maybe peer behind those carefully constructed public statements presidents often make.
Yeah, the official lines, the diplomatic speak.
Exactly, the things they say when the world is listening, and they have to be incredibly precise. But what happens, when they step away from the podium?
Or maybe years later, just writing in their diary.
Some hidden history. Or in a candid interview, free from the immediate pressures of the Oval Office. What do they really think? So today, we're taking a deep dive into exactly that. The private thoughts, the post-presidency reflections of U.S. presidents regarding Israel.
And it turns out their personal views, those frustrations, sometimes even the calculations,
Yeah,
well, they could differ quite a bit from the public stance.
significantly sometimes. And these private insights, they can offer a really complex and very human picture of this crucial relationship and the intense pressures these presidents felt they were under. And for this deep dive, we're drawing straight from the source material, presidential memoirs, published diaries, candid post-presidency interviews spanning the last few decades.
Right, we're going straight to their own words. And our mission here is really to unpack these often revealing insights. What do they tell us about the realities of managing this key relationship from inside the Oval Office?
The compromises involved, maybe?
Exactly. The compromises, the dynamics presidents saw all through what they themselves wrote or said. Let's see what the sources actually tell us.
Okay, where better to start than with someone whose post-presidency views became, well, incredibly candid and pretty controversial, Jimmy Carter, president from 77 to 81.
Right. Camp David Accords, his big achievement.
Absolutely. We all remember that, bringing Sadat and Begin together.
yeah, and
Monumental.
what
It
happened
really
to
was.
the Prime
But,
Minister of
even during
Israel
his
after that?
presidency, his personal diary entries, which were published later,
Hmm.
they reveal this layer of frustration kind of simmering beneath the surface.
Already, while he was still in office.
Yeah. He privately noted concerns about Israeli settlement expansion in the occupied territories and what he saw as a reluctance from the Israeli government at the time under begin to cede territory.
Even while he was maintaining those cordial public relations.
Right. He records pressing, begin privately on settlements, feeling a kind of moral urgency he maybe couldn't always express so openly in public diplomacy.
Interesting.
And these private concerns, well, they really foreshadowed the much stronger, much more critical views he'd voice later on.
And that shift after leaving office, that wasn't subtle, was it?
Oh, not at all. It was like a seismic shift. Once he was out of the White House, Carter became maybe the most outspoken former president on this issue.
Particularly with his 2006 book.
Exactly. Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. I mean, the title itself was provocative. He offered a really blunt critique.
He stated pretty clearly that he thought Israeli actions were the main obstacle.
He did. He wrote, this is a direct quote, "Israel's continued control and colonization of Palestinian land have been the primary obstacles to a comprehensive peace agreement." Pretty direct.
And that term, apartheid, that drew a huge amount of attention.
Huge. And he clarified it right. He said he was using it specifically for what he saw as a two-tiered system in the Palestinian territories under occupation. He was careful to say he was not referring to Israel within its 1948 borders.
So it was a specific critique of the occupation policies.
Yes, and he said the title was deliberate to, quote, provoke discussion and analysis in the U.S., where he felt open debate on Israeli policies was, well, almost completely absent.
Implying it was constrained by domestic politics, perhaps?
That's
I find it interesting how far politics has shifted to where we're now having bills they're trying to pass to where you can't even say that. One of them was that if you say that Jesus was killed by Jews, that would be anti-Semitism. If you say that Israel is a racist state, then that would be classified as anti-Semitism. And thankfully, it didn't get passed that time in that bill. But how many more? It's just, yeah.
That seems to be the implication. And he didn't stop there. He criticized U.S. policy itself, saying the U.S. was harming its own standing, maybe even fueling anti-American sentiment, by his words, unofficially condoning or abetting the Israeli confiscation and colonization of Palestinian territories.
Wow. That's incredibly direct criticism of U.S. policy from a former president. Must have caused waves.
Oh, big time. Sharp criticism from many corners, Congress, even people in his own party. But, you know, like he intended, it definitely opened up a public conversation.
On topics that were maybe taboo before.
Exactly. Things that had been kind of off limits in mainstream U.S. political talk. It forced people to grapple with the language, the issues.
So with Carter, what these sources show us is this journey, right? From private frustration simmering in office to this really public, highly provocative critique once he was free from those political constraints of the presidency.
Precisely. His personal moral concerns, his strategic worries, they really matured into this powerful, if definitely controversial, public stance after he left office.
Okay. Now let's shift gears. Let's talk about a president who poured just enormous personal energy into brokering peace. Bill Clinton, 93 to 2001.
Right. Deeply involved, especially towards the end of his second term, put a lot of political capital into it.
His relationships with Rabin, with Perez, seemed quite warm initially.
Yeah, characterized by real partnership. But his private tensions with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during Netanyahu's first term in the late 90s, accounts suggest those were pretty palpable.
He found Netanyahu resistant.
Reports indicate he privately felt Netanyahu was resistant to the Oslo process, the peace framework they were working under. And that led to significant private frustration, you know, even while his public statements were affirming the strong U.S.-Israel bond, kept behind closed doors mostly.
And then his reflections after leaving office, especially about the collapse of the 2000 Camp David summit. His memoir, My Life, is incredibly candid there.
Incredibly. Clinton makes his perspective crystal clear. He felt deep personal anger, real disappointment towards Yasser Arafat, the Palestinian leader, for rejecting the deal proposed at that summit.
He recounts a really emotional moment, doesn't he?
He does, telling Arafat directly. And this quote from his book is powerful. Mr. Chairman, I am not a great man. I am a failure, and you have made me one.
Wow, that speaks volumes about his personal investment.
Absolutely. He really took that failure personally. He goes on to detail the offer, describing it as a Palestinian state with a capital in East Jerusalem, 96% of the West Bank.
He seemed genuinely shocked it was turned down.
He wrote with real conviction, the deal was so good I couldn't believe anyone would be foolish enough to let it go. His view, very clearly stated, was that Arafat missed a truly historic chance for statehood and peace right then.
And he warned Arafat about the consequences, too.
He did, a stark warning. He told Arafat that saying no meant he was, quote, single-handedly electing Ariel Sharon, the hardliner.
And that he would reap the whirlwind.
Exactly, implying a likely escalation of conflict. And, well, Sharon was elected shortly after the summit failed.
So Clinton's post-presidency account really puts the blame for that failure squarely on the Palestinian side.
That's his clear perspective, that Arafat didn't accept what Clinton saw as an incredibly generous, perhaps unrepeatable offer.
It's just striking, isn't it, how personally invested a president can get in these negotiations.
Absolutely.
And how those feelings, that frustration, shapes their whole view of history afterwards.
It's a vivid window, really, into the immense pressure, the emotional toll of being right in the middle of those high-stakes talks, and how the outcome just fundamentally shaped Clinton's lasting judgment on who missed the boat.
Okay, let's move on to George W. Bush, 2001 to 2009. His public stance, consistently, strongly pro-Israel.
Very clear public stance, yes. And he was the first U.S. president to explicitly endorse a Palestinian state existing alongside Israel, the two-state solution.
Right. But privately, his memoir Decision Points suggests maybe a more complex picture, a strategic balancing act sometimes.
That's what it suggests, trying to moderate Israeli actions at times to align better with broader U.S. interests or, the pursuit of peace, however difficult.
There's that anecdote about the Syrian reactor in 2007.
Yeah, that's a really revealing one. Prime Minister Ehud Olmert made a direct request to Bush
To have the U.S. bomb it, right.
Exactly. Olmert asked Bush point blank, "George, I'm asking you to bomb the compound, a suspected Syrian nuclear facility."
And Bush considered it, but ultimately said no to a U.S. strike.
He did, after deliberation with his national security team. His reasoning, as he
Wow.
lays it out in the memoir,
I didn't know
was
that.
basically twofold.
Okay.
First, the international blowback.
Yeah.
He believed bombing a sovereign country with no warning or announced justification would create severe blowback. Makes sense.
And the second reason, more about the alliance itself.
Exactly. Crucially, he wrote that America can't appear to be doing Israel's bidding in such a direct, sensitive military action.
So protecting the perception of U.S. independence.
Right. Israel eventually carried out the strike themselves, unilaterally. Bush privately supported their right to self-defense against that kind of threat, but he kept the U.S. officially separate from the operation.
That story really highlights that delicate balance, doesn't it? Supporting an ally's security, but also guarding U.S. strategic interests and
Interesting.
appearance.
It absolutely does. And in his post-presidency reflections, Bush also frames the conflict through his post-9/11 lens, the war on terror.
Right. He saw it as part of that larger struggle.
Yeah, he wrote, "The struggle in the Holy Land is between those who seek peace and extremists who promote terror." So his view of regional dynamics was definitely shaped by that global fight against extremism. He saw Israel's security concerns as fitting into that framework.
Did he feel any progress was made during his term, despite the challenges?
He seemed to feel some incremental progress was made.
Yeah, right.
He noted, entering office during the Second Intifada, a period of intense violence.
What about
Mhm.
the
By the time he
weapons of
left,
mass
he felt
destruction?
things had shifted somewhat.
That was the whole
Palestinian leaders
point.
were publicly rejecting terror. Israel had withdrawn from Gaza settlements and expressed support, even with caveats, for two states.
He saw that as partly due to his administration's efforts, like the roadmap.
Yeah, he seemed to view it that way, even if a final peace deal was obviously still out of reach. But those private accounts, like the Syria story, they show that his strong public support for Israel's security, especially against threats like Iran, well, it existed alongside this quiet determination
To say no sometimes.
to say no, specifically if it looked like the U.S. was just acting as Israel's bidding, rather than as an independent player pursuing its own defined interests.
So behind that image of unwavering support, there are these private moments of pushing back.
Exactly. His memoir gives us a glimpse into that internal calculus.
Right.
How do you maintain a strong alliance but also ensure U.S. foreign policy has its own distinct justification and direction?
Okay, next up. Barack Obama, 2009 to 2017. His relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu, often described publicly as tense.
And the private reflections. They absolutely confirm that tension, and they add these layers of frustration. Obama's memoir, Other Counts. They give glimpses of real exasperation.
Like that open mic incident?
Yeah, the 2011 G20 summit, that was telling. French President Sarkozy was caught complaining about Netanyahu, calling him a liar.
And Obama's response.
Obama, maybe forgetting the mic was hot, just responded, "You're fed up with him. I have to deal with him even more often than you." Pretty unguarded. Revealed that personal irritation.
And specific policy clashes clearly fueled that frustration, too.
Oh, definitely. Incidents like unexpected Israeli settlement announcements, sometimes timed in ways that really embarrassed the administration, like during a visit by Vice President Biden.
Right, I remember that.
Those kinds of things led Obama to privately see Netanyahu's actions as, quote, untrustworthy. He came to believe that some daylight, public distance between U.S. and Israeli policy was sometimes necessary just to maintain U.S. credibility.
Even while publicly stressing the alliance remains strong.
Right. And then there was Netanyahu addressing Congress directly in 2015 to oppose the Iran nuclear deal.
Without coordinating with the White House first.
Exactly.
Oh.
Obama privately saw that as a major breach of protocol, a real breakdown of trust.
Now, his post-presidency memoir, A Promised Land, is really revealing about the domestic political side of things, right? The pressures he felt.
Oh, very direct on this. This is a key insight he offers into presidential calculations. He writes explicitly about his perception that, well, let me quote, "Politicians who criticized Israel policy too loudly risked being tagged as anti-Israel and possibly anti-Semitic, and were confronted with a well-funded opponent in the next election."
So he felt there were powerful domestic forces making criticism difficult.
Yes, he points to prominent pro-Israel lobbying groups like AIPAC and suggests their influence had shifted politically, making it tough for even mainstream politicians to voice anything but strong, uncritical support for Israeli government policies without facing significant domestic blowback.
And he gives specific examples of how this played out.
He does. He talks about pushing Netanyahu early on for settlement freeze, saw it as crucial for credible peace talks.
And the reaction.
Netanyahu reacted very negatively. And Obama writes that immediately after, the White House phone started ringing off the hook with complaints, people demanding to know why the U.S. was picking on Israel.
Wow.
He saw that swift, coordinated response as a clear example of how, quote, normal policy differences with an Israeli prime minister would exact a domestic political cost for an American president, making it hard to navigate disagreements based purely on foreign policy considerations.
He even talks about moments of personal anger over this stuff.
Yeah, he recounts a rare
You just
instance
get-
where he says he
How cool.
outcursed
You just get to
Rahm
pay people to
Emanuel, his
complain
chief of
for
staff,
you.
after being
You don't
falsely
even have to go do the complaining yourself. You just pay a bunch of people to go, and now you can hire people to go be activists for you. Like protesting activists.
accused in the press of snubbing Netanyahu during a visit,
Accusations he thought came from the Israeli side.
or their allies. Yeah, spins, basically. But interestingly, despite all that friction, he also offers this kind of nuanced respect for Netanyahu's political skill. Yeah, acknowledging that Netanyahu expertly used his knowledge of American politics and the media to rally opposition within the U.S. against Obama's own policies, effectively influencing U.S. opinion and Congress against the American president's initiatives.
So Obama's memoir paints this
Wow.
picture of a president feeling really constrained.
Yeah, significantly constrained by what he saw as the domestic political costs of disagreeing with the Israeli government and harboring considerable frustration from those dealings, particularly with Netanyahu.
It's a powerful account of how foreign policy gets tangled up with domestic politics.
Deeply entangled. It highlights the incredibly complex environment presidents navigate when trying to push specific policy goals in that region.
Okay, finally, let's look at Donald Trump. 2017 to 2021, publicly. A stance of remarkably strong alignment with Netanyahu's government.
Yeah, during his presidency, Trump constantly boasted about his relationship with Netanyahu, presented himself as the most pro-Israel president ever.
Highlighting things like the embassy move to Jerusalem, recognizing the Golan Heights.
Exactly. And at the time, there's very little record of him privately criticizing Israeli policy. In fact, accounts from inside his administration suggest that he'd often boast he was doing more for Israel than they were even asking for.
But there were maybe some hints later on, even before he left office.
Some later reports suggested that, yeah, towards the end of his term, he was privately starting to question Netanyahu's actual commitment to peace. Maybe felt the prime minister was more focused on getting Trump's help specifically against Iran.
But it was his post-presidency remarks.
I wonder if
Those
they're
were
still trying to get
explosive,
that done
especially
yet.
in interviews with journalist Barack Obama.
Oh, absolutely explosive. A dramatic, unprecedented shift. Unlike the others writing memoirs, Trump's most revealing comments came in these candid interviews. He expressed just profound personal anger at Netanyahu.
Specifically for congratulating Joe Biden after the 2020 election.
Trump saw that as a massive betrayal of personal loyalty. He famously said, and this is a direct quote from those interviews, "I haven't spoken to him since. Frunk him."
I mean, that language. From a former U.S. president about the leader of a close ally he'd championed, it's stunning.
It is truly
He
extraordinary.
goes, "Fuck
and it just
him."
reveals the uniquely personal and transactional nature of how Trump viewed that relationship.
The bitterness was all about loyalty?
In his own words, yes. Feeling betrayed because he believed he did more for Bibi than anyone else. He listed the embassy, the Golan, cutting off aid to the Palestinian Authority.
Right.
And because of all that, he felt he was owed reciprocal personal loyalty from Netanyahu, almost separate from the actual diplomatic relationship between the countries.
And his view of Netanyahu's goals seemed to harden after he left office, too.
Yes, he voiced a much more critical perspective than he ever had publicly while president. He stated flat out that by the end of his term, he had concluded that Netanyahu didn't really want peace with the Palestinians and was using him, Trump, on Iran.
So a personal takeaway that Netanyahu wasn't a genuine peace partner and was just leveraging
I
the
wonder-
relationship for specific
I wonder if he's
Israeli
still
goals.
holding strong
much.
on that.
It shows Trump's perspective became uniquely personalized, driven far more by perceived personal loyalty or disloyalty in the sense of being used, rather than by, traditional foreign policy or shared strategic goals between the nations.
It really underscores how even these seemingly rock-solid public alliances can mask significant private friction
Okay.
or resentment.
I've got one more here.
What happens when historical records, really controversial documents and theological interpretations all collide? How do these totally different narratives end up shaping how we understand a movement, its aims, and, well, its impact? Welcome to the deep dive.
That collision is exactly what we're digging into today. We've got this stack of sources provided to us, and we're going deep into the history of Zionism and also Christian Zionism,
Right.
looking at things like the personal diaries of Theodor Herzl, often called the father of modern political Zionism. And then there's that infamous and widely disputed document, the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion.
And we're not stopping there, are we? We're also looking into the dynamics of power, finance, international relations, but specifically as they're presented in these texts.
Exactly. And the critiques, the alleged consequences that are discussed right there within the source material itself. Our sources for this, they're quite varied. We have excerpts from historical diaries like Herzl's. We've got analyses looking at political strategy, public opinion, then the Protocols document itself. Historical accounts focusing on Christian Zionism, and an analysis that looks specifically at settler violence.
So our mission for you, listening in, is pretty clear. We want to guide you through the landscape that these specific sources present, pulling out the key info, the different angles they offer. The goal is to help you get better informed by, highlighting maybe surprising details, exploring the different accounts. And this is crucial without us adding any outside info or taking sides on the viewpoints and the sources. We're just presenting what they say.
Our focus is purely on laying out the narratives, the information that's contained within this material we've been given, letting you see the different pictures they paint.
Okay, let's get into it. Starting with, well, what many see as a foundational point for modern political Zionism, these excerpts from Theodor Herzl's diaries. What did these really personal notes actually tell us about his vision and, the practical side of his early efforts?
Well, what's really fascinating, I think, is how the diaries give you this first-person window. You see the huge ambition, definitely, but also the very human, often quite frustrating, practical and political hurdles Herzl was up against.
So they're not just strategy documents.
Not at all. They're full of his thoughts, his struggles, his moments of hope, but also despair as he's trying to actually make these ideas happen, to turn them into reality.
So based on what's documented in these diaries, what was the core of his vision and the strategy he was trying to use?
At its heart, Herzl's whole approach was driven by what was called the Jewish question. It was widespread discrimination, the persecution Jews faced in Europe. He saw a territorial solution as the necessary answer.
He felt it was urgent.
Deeply. His diaries really reflect this profound sense of seriousness, of urgency. He even notes, sometimes with real frustration, what he as the political lethargy of some Jews, people he felt didn't fully grasp the dangers he saw coming. He describes his own project as being, quote, as serious as the situation of the Jews itself. That shows his conviction, right?
And how did he actually plan to achieve this goal?
Sorry, I've got another video here.
Breaking news. Jewish revolutionary refuses crown, disappoints nationalist supporters. In a shocking turn of events, Jesus of Nazareth, widely expected to lead a rebellion against Roman occupation and establish Israeli independence, has categorically rejected attempts to make him king. Sources close to the situation report that when supporters attempted to take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. John 6:15.
Apparently, the creator of the universe, the one who spoke galaxies into existence, needs our help securing a specific piece of Middle Eastern real estate. At least that's what Christian Zionists would have us believe. It's curious how the God who claims the earth is mine, Psalm 24:1, suddenly requires human governments, military might, and Western foreign policy to fulfill his promises. Who knew divine omnipotence had such practical limitations? Christian Zionism, the theological position that modern Israel's establishment in 1948 represents the fulfillment of biblical prophecy, and deserves unconditional Christian support, has dominated evangelical eschatology for decades. Yet this perspective creates an awkward problem. It directly contradicts core New Testament teachings. What if the Bible itself undermines the very foundations of Zionism through its emphasis on Christ as the fulfillment of all promises? Think of the Old Covenant like that streaming service you forgot to cancel, except God didn't forget. He intentionally replaced it with something better. The writer of Hebrews couldn't be clearer. Christ mediates a better covenant, which has been enacted on better promises. Hebrews 8:6. And just in case we miss the point, verse 13 spells it out. When he said a new covenant, he has made the first obsolete. Obsolete, as in no longer valid, as in expired. It's remarkable how many Bible-believing Christians will meticulously follow the New Testament in matters of salvation, but revert to Old Testament land promises when discussing modern Israel. It's theological cherry-picking at its finest. Accept the cross for salvation, but ignore it when it comes to national identity and land claims. Jesus himself declared that everything written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled. Luke 24:44. Note the past tense, fulfilled. Not will be fulfilled once America helps Israel secure its borders. The covenant promises weren't postponed. They were completed in Christ. Paul drives this home in Galatians 3:16, pointing out that God's promises were made to Abraham and his singular seed, explicitly identified as Christ, not the modern nation-state of Israel. And if that weren't enough, 2 Corinthians 1:20 confirms that all the promises of God find their yes in him. Not some promises. All promises. If you're going to build an entire theological system around Israel, you might want to be sure you know who that actually refers to in the New Testament. Spoiler alert, it's probably not who you think. Paul drops a theological bombshell in Romans 9:6-8. Not all who are descended from Israel belong to Israel. Wait, what? He clarifies, it is not the children of the flesh who are the children of God, but the children of the promise. In other words, God's definition of Israel has nothing to do with ethnicity and everything to do with faith. This redefinition continues in Galatians 6:16, where Paul refers to the church, not the nation-state, as the Israel of God. And in Philippians 3:3, he declares that we, followers of Christ, are the true circumcision, who worship by the Spirit of God. The irony is palpable. Many Christians spend their energy supporting a physical nation, while Paul spent his dismantling the very concept of a physically defined people of God. Perhaps the greatest contradiction in Christian Zionism is its fervent insistence on maintaining the very distinction that Christ died to abolish. There is neither Jew nor Greek, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Galatians 3:28. Yet here we are, centuries later, rebuilding the dividing wall that Christ tore down, insisting that ethnicity still matters to God. The reality is that Jesus consistently rejected nationalist messianic expectations, the very expectations that modern Christian Zionism has resurrected. His kingdom, he insisted, is not of this world. John 18:36. He even explicitly stated that the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people producing its fruits. Matthew 21:43. The contradiction is stark. Jesus rejected a nationalist kingdom, yet many of his followers today are obsessed with establishing one in his name. He refused to use divine power to secure political sovereignty for Israel. Yet we're told God now requires human military might to accomplish what Jesus wouldn't. The obsession with rebuilding a physical temple in Jerusalem might be the most perplexing aspect of Christian Zionist theology. Apparently, God was just kidding when he inspired Paul to write, "Don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple, and that God's Spirit dwells in your midst?" 1 Corinthians 3:16. Imagine spending millions of dollars preparing for a physical temple when God has already established his dwelling place in people, not buildings. It's like meticulously planning to build your spouse a house while they're already living with you. Thanks for the thought, but I'm already here. The fixation.
Well, sorry, I'm trying to put it on my playlist.
I have a new book coming out which is called Lobbying for Zionism Across the Atlantic, and I show how from 1900, both in America and in Britain, you target politicians wherever they are at the beginning of their career, you commit them to Zionism.
Jeez, this sounds so familiar.
And at first, of course, they were not powerful enough to influence enough people. But you know, the more they grew in numbers, they were able to influence more. So when people say, why does Biden so automatically supports Israel? The lobby doesn't need to ring Biden and say to him, you better support Israel.
He knows the rules of the
game. He knows the rules. He knows what happened
We're
to anyone
just
who
listening
even
about
dared
that.
to slightly, like Obama or Carter, slightly challenged
Wow.
what happened to them. You read Obama's memoirs, you can see how
This is
he
where
said,
I got
suddenly
that memoir
understood
from.
any word I'm
Like the
saying in
idea to read all
Israel
the
can
memoirs.
bring down Congress. So I had to be very, very careful.
When I
And
heard this, I
actually
was
what
like,
he
all right, I
says,
wanna
he
see what
admits,
they all
I could
think.
not be loyal to my basic instinct, which was to be pro-Palestinians. I couldn't, because I wouldn't be a president.
Let's see how it works. Hey, Garrett, this is Steve with Rapid Radio. Can you hear me?
Sorry, Steve.
Well, you tried the other day to raise science-based questions about
is
pivotal
interesting.
events in American history.
Very interesting.
24 years ago, 9/11, and you asked a question that I think any honest person would ask, like, Building 7 was never hit by a plane. Why did it fall down in exactly the same way the first two towers did? That shouldn't be verboten. So you asked that question. I want to read the response from a Republican in the House, a new member called Mike Lawler, I guess from New York. And he said this. I don't know if you know him. You probably don't. He just got there. Quote, Senator Johnson should stop peddling conspiracy theories about the worst terrorist attack in our nation's history and one that forever altered the lives of so many of my fellow New Yorkers. Crap like this dishonors and disrespects the innocent lives lost, our brave first responders, and all families and survivors who still carry the pain of 9/11 each and every day. So I think Lawler was like in high school when 9/11 happened. He doesn't really seem to represent New York anyway, but whatever. The point is, why would he attack you personally for asking like the most?
That's a really good question.
Ah, yes. Another conspiracy theory, except no. See, conspiracies are wild, unproven claims whispered by men in tinfoil hats. What we have here is something entirely different. It's called evidence. Declassified evidence. FBI and CIA approved evidence. Which means, if you're offended by the following information, don't take it up with me. Take it up with the boys over at Langley that released it. They'll be delighted to hear from you. Let's talk about the dancing Israelis. 5 men who celebrated the worst terrorist attack on US soil, while holding cameras, smiling, and according to multiple eyewitnesses, high-fibbing each other. The moving company and its not-so-innocent van. Imagine, just for a moment, that you witness a horrific terrorist attack. Do you a run for your life? Be watch in horror? Or C, set up your camera in the perfect position? Start taking photos and jump for joy like you just won the lottery. If you chose C, congratulations. You
I would just I just want to draw everyone's attention to the date on this photograph. September 10th, 2001. Why did they white this part out? Did they forget to white that out? Interesting.
Might just be a Mossad agent working undercover as a mover. Yes, these 5 men were caught red-handed, taking photos and laughing, mere minutes after the first plane hit. They were arrested later that day by and what was inside their van. Oh, just a few harmless things like $4,700 in cash hidden in a sock. Because normal people carry money this way, obviously. Box cutters, as in the exact type of weapon used by the hijackers. But I'm sure that's just a wacky coincidence. A map with key locations marked. Just sightseeing, I'm sure.
This is...
Traces.
I just thought of something. I just thought of something. I want to see if I can find this video quick.
Completely normal for a moving company. Totally the phone calls and the urban moving systems front. Let's move to the phone records, shall we? The arrested men had been in constant contact with Israeli intelligence and their so-called moving company. It was a front confirmed by the FBI. How do we know? Because the owner of Urban Moving Systems, Dominic Otto Suter, fled to Israel 2 days after 9/11, immediately after being questioned. Seems a little suspicious, doesn't it? Tell me what kind of innocent businessman runs away mid-investigation to a foreign country. I'll wait. The documenting the event confession.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
Oh, you were documenting the event. Fascinating. Pray tell, how exactly were you so well positioned to document an attack that, according to the US government, was a complete surprise? Psychic powers, divine intervention, or just maybe intelligence, foreknowledge. The anti-Semitism defense, the laziest argument ever. And now, for my favorite part, the completely predictable attempt to dismiss these declassified official FBI reports as anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Is it, though? Is it really? Because I fail to see how reading an FBI document is an attack on an entire religion. This is not about Judaism. It is about intelligence operations. It is about foreign nationals working for a suspected Mossad front, celebrating 9/11s, possessing bomb residue, fleeing the country, and then receiving special treatment when the Bush administration intervened in their release.
Okay, so I got one other video here.
Using the right weight matters. The body
at 9 in the morning, and it was going to Los Angeles.
Same time as the other 4.
Same time. It would have.
Because as you show, I don't want to give too much of it away, but you know, there's 4 guys, and of course, these are politically correct terms, so we have to say, of course, not all Arabs or Muslims are terrorists. Yes, we never said differently, but it is just 4 Arabs sitting in first class. One of them is a man in a burqa.
That's what the flight attendant said.
Which also would have been a good title. The Man in the Burq.
That's what the flight attendant said. There were 3 flight attendants we interviewed. We interviewed the pilot. And this was a plane, a United flight that was supposed to take off from JFK at 9 in the morning, and it was going to Los Angeles.
Same time as the other 4.
Same time. It would have aligned perfectly. And there were a lot of things that happened, but ultimately, I think the reason this is so stunning that it never really came out is these flight attendants were all interviewed by the FBI immediately. The FBI was alarmed. They locked that plane up after everybody got evacuated, and all of a sudden, people on the ground saw 2 people running in the plane. The plane had been fully empty, and the authorities came and opened the door,
and that's who
and the
set the
hatch
box cutters
that
in the
leads
seats.
from the cabin down to the bottom of the plane and the tarmac, it was open. Somebody opened this hatch. What the pilot thinks, and what he told me, they found box cutters in the plane right next to his, and it was one number up.
First class.
In first class, in the seat pocket.
Wait, what?
Number
in
up.
First class.
In first class, in the plane right next to his, and it was one number
in
up.
First class.
In first class, in the seat pockets.
Right. I mean, they did everything but leave a business card that said Mohammed Kablooui.
Well, look.
Okay, interesting. Okay, let's go back.
That you witness a horrific terrorist attack. Do you a run for your life? Be watch in horror, or C, set up your camera in the perfect position. Start taking photos and jump for joy like you just won the lottery. If you chose C, congratulations. You might just be a Mossad agent working undercover as a mover. Yes, these 5 men were caught red-handed, taking photos and laughing, mere minutes after the first plane hit. They were arrested.
This is still
later
considered a
that
conspiracy
day.
theory.
And what was
That's what I would like to
their
know.
van? Oh, just a few harmless things, like
I mean, how is it that
$4,700
propaganda can have such a hold on our country and
because
culture
normal
that
people carry money this way? Obviously, box cutters, as in the exact
Box
type
cutters.
of weapon used by the hijackers. But I'm sure that's just a wacky coincidence. A map with key locations marked, just sightseeing, I'm sure. Traces of explosive residue, completely normal for a moving company. Totally the phone calls and the urban moving systems front. Let's move to the phone records, shall we? The arrested men had been in constant contact with Israeli intelligence and their so-called moving company. It was a front confirmed by the FBI. How do we know? Because the owner of Urban Moving Systems, Dominic Otto Suter, fled to Israel 2 days after 9/11, immediately after being questioned. Seems a little suspicious, doesn't it? Tell me what kind of innocent businessman runs away mid-investigation to a foreign country. I'll wait. The documenting the event confession.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
Huh. Interesting.
You were documenting the event.
That was on a Israel daily talk show on their national television.
Fascinating. Pray tell, how exactly were you so well positioned to document an attack that, according to the US government, was a complete surprise? psychic powers, divine intervention, or just maybe intelligence, foreknowledge. The anti-Semitism defense, the laziest argument ever. And now, for my favorite part, the completely predictable attempt to dismiss these declassified official FBI reports as anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Is it, though? Is it really? Because I fail to see how reading an FBI document is an attack on an entire religion. This is not about Judaism. It is about intelligence operations. It is about foreign nationals working for a suspected Mossad front, celebrating 9/11s, possessing bomb residue, fleeing the country, and then receiving special treatment when the Bush administration intervened in their release. If this exact scenario involved, say, Russian agents, would it be racist to question it? Of course not. But because it involves Israel, suddenly it's of interesting double standard, isn't it? And where was the mainstream media while all of this was happening? Oh, that's right, completely silent. Funny, isn't it? CNN spent years obsessing over Hijacked, but they never found time to investigate this. So, if after all this, you still believe this is just some conspiracy theory, let me make this very simple for you. This right here. This is the US government telling you that evidence exists, but you aren't allowed to see it. If you think this story is fake news, I invite you to march straight into CIA headquarters, knock on their door, and demand they explain why they declassified it. Let me know how that goes. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers, against principalities, and we wrestle against the worldly rulers over the darkness. Thank you for watching MetaMysterium. Keep shining. Thank you to everyone that has subscribed so far, putting the channel at over 2,000 subscribed viewers that have been enjoying these little mental getaways.
Documentary. We'll explore the origins and evolution of the U.S. financial system.
They say love makes the world go round. But have you ever considered that lobbying might do the same? In a world where billions of dollars, powerful politicians, an unwavering allegiance to a foreign nation determine the course of history, one lobby stands above the rest. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Israeli Lobby, a love story, where we uncover the most fascinating long-term relationship in American politics between the US government and the most charming, persistent, and well-funded lobbyists on the planet. Once upon a time, long before influencers sold you protein shakes on Instagram, a different kind of influencing was taking place. Zionist political advocacy. Back in the early 20th century, Jewish activists and Christian Zionists got together, held hands, and said, "Hey, why don't we convince world leaders to carve out a little homeland for the Jewish people?" Entered the Balfour Declaration of 1917, basically Britain's way of promising a homeland to the Jewish people, while not so secretly hoping they'd take care of the local inhabitants' situation later. Fast forward to 1948, Israel is officially a thing. American politicians are thrilled Jewish American organizations are on cloud nine, and Arab nations, well, let's just say they were less enthusiastic. Now, if you're a brand new country in the middle of a neighborhood where no one likes you, what's the first thing you do? That's right. You find yourself a very wealthy, very influential friend. And so, in 1951, IPAC America's Sweetheart Lobbying Group was born. Its mission: to make sure every American politician knows that supporting Israel is more important than, well, just about anything. By the 1970s, Israel had been through a few wars, taken some land, and IPAC had grown. And here's where it gets fun. The US wasn't just sending Israel thoughts and prayers. They were sending money. That's right, folks. While you worry about paying your student loans, Israel gets about $3.8 billion in free military aid every year. It's like America's favorite subscription service, except instead of streaming shows, you get F-35 fighter jets. So, how does the Israeli lobby ensure eternal loyalty from us lawmakers? Well, they follow the good old-fashioned rules of American democracy. Money talks. PACKs, super PACs, campaign donations. Oh my. If you're running for Congress and you don't enthusiastically support Israel, you might as well start packing your bags early. Take Senator Chuck Schumer, for example. He once said he sees himself as a guardian of Israel in the US Senate. Wow. And here we thought his job was representing Americans. Silly us. Ever notice how Israel can bomb an entire apartment complex and the headline still reads, "Violence erupts in the Middle East"? Amazing, isn't it? Ah, yes, the golden rule. If you criticize Israel, you hate a whole religion and are anti-U-no-what. That's how the game works, and it works beautifully. Now, you might be wondering, why do American evangelicals care so much about Israel? The answer: the second coming of Jesus. See, for Christian Zionists, supporting Israel isn't just about politics. It's about helping fulfill, because when Israel is fully restored, Jesus will return. And, well, things aren't looking too good for the Jews in that scenario. But don't worry, for now, they're besties. But wait, there's a twist. Younger Americans aren't buying it anymore. Progressive Jewish groups, college students, and even some politicians are starting to ask, hey, why are we giving billions to a country that occupies Palestinian land? Of course, saying that gets you labeled anti-Semitic immediately. And so our love story continues. No matter who is in the White House, no matter how many illegal settlements Israel builds, the money keeps flowing, the politicians keep smiling, and the media keeps spinning. Coming up in our next episode on MetaMysterium, we are unpacking the history of Christian Zionism in America and the role of the Schofield. The Federal Reserve, the greatest scam never told, or how a bunch of bankers tricked an entire nation into perpetual debt slavery. Once upon a time, in a land where people still thought money had actual value, A group of the wealthiest bankers, financiers, and political insiders met in total secrecy on a private island to rearrange the entire US economic system in their favor. No, this isn't the plot of a Bond villain movie, this is real history. The year was 1910. The place, Jekyll Island, Georgia. The attendees, some of the most powerful financial figures in the world, including representatives from J.P. Morgan, the Rockefellers, and the Rothschilds. Their mission: to create a private banking cartel that could control the entire U.S. money supply, while convincing the public that it was all being done for their own good. The result: the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, a bill so catastrophic to American sovereignty that even the sitting president who signed it, Woodrow Wilson, later admitted he had destroyed the country in doing so. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, the greatest financial scam in human history was born. Jekyll Island, where the scam was born. Imagine you and a few of your richest friends got together and decided to create a system where only you had the power.
Hey
to
bro, I got a
print money,
great idea.
Lend it to everyone else at interest.
Let's take this
and
monopoly
then
money.
convinced the public that this system was actually in there. That's exactly what happened on Jekyll Island in 1910. This wasn't just a casual weekend retreat. This was a conspiracy in the purest sense of the word. The men in attendance operated under strict secrecy, going so far as to avoid using their last names to prevent the press from catching wind of what they were up to. Among them were Senator Nelson Aldrich, the official frontman for the banking elites in Congress; Paul Verborg, a representative of the Rothschild banking dynasty in Europe, and a mastermind behind the central banking model; Frank Vanderlip, president of the National City Bank, an institution controlled by the Rockefellers; Henry Davison and Charles Norton, close associates of J.P. Morgan, one of the wealthiest financiers of the era. Their masterstroke was not just in creating a private central bank, but in making sure that the public believed it was a government institution. Newsflash: it isn't. Despite the name, the Federal Reserve is about as federal as Federal Express. It is a privately owned banking cartel that operates outside
I did
the
jack that
jurisdiction
line.
of the U.S.
If
government.
anybody's wondering.
Congress doesn't control it. The president doesn't control it. And despite
From
its
Zeitgeist
massive
back in the day.
influence over the
Leave me a
economy,
comment if y'all have seen
it has
Zeitgeist.
never been fully audited. So, how did these private bankers gain total control over the U.S. money supply? Simple. They wrote the legislation themselves and then convinced Congress to pass it. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913. America
I just
sells
wonder
its
how
soul.
easy
When
it's
the Federal Reserve
been
Act was
throughout
rammed
history to
through
bribe
Congress
people
in
with money
December of
to put their
1913,
own personal interest in
most
front of, like,
representatives
and
didn't even read
let's say if they serve in a
Sound
government position.
familiar? It was sold to the public as a necessary reform to prevent financial panics and bring stability to the banking system. What it really did was give private bankers total control over the issuance of U.S. currency, ensure that every single dollar in circulation was borrowed from the Federal Reserve with interest, allow the government to go into unlimited debt, funding wars and social programs with money it doesn't actually have. The genius of this scam was that most people didn't even realize what had happened. The government was still printing money, but only by borrowing it from the Federal Reserve. And because every dollar was issued with interest, the total debt could never actually be repaid. Think about it. If every dollar is borrowed into existence, where does the money come from to pay the interest? It doesn't exist. The only way to keep the system running is to create more debt. This is why the national debt has never, and will never, go down. It can't go down. The Federal Reserve was now the de facto ruler of the US economy, and the American people had no idea they had just been shackled in financial servitude for generations to come. How the Federal Reserve manufactures booms and busts. Now that the banking cartel had total control over the money supply, they could do something truly spectacular. Create economic crises on demand.
This video turned out pretty dope, not gonna lie.
The Fed prints money, floods the economy with cheap credit, and encourages borrowing. People and businesses take on massive debt, assuming the good times will never end. Once the economy is heavily leveraged, the Fed raises interest rates, making debt repayment impossible. Businesses fail, banks collapse, and millions lose their jobs. The Fed steps in as the savior by bailing out banks and restarting the cycle, all while consolidating even more power. This pattern has repeated over and over. The Great Depression, 1929, caused by the Fed over-expanding credit and then tightening it overnight. The 2008 financial crisis, fueled by the Fed's artificially low interest rates and subprime mortgage bubble. The COVID-19 economic collapse, engineered by trillions in money printing and corporate bailouts, while average Americans got peanuts. Each time, the same people benefit: Wall Street, the Federal Reserve, and the banking elites. Each time, the average person gets crushed under more debt, lower wages, and rising inflation. The ultimate question: why does the government need the Fed? One might ask, why does the US government need to borrow its own money from a private bank? That's the real kicker. It doesn't. The US Treasury could simply print money directly without paying interest to private bankers. But if they did that, the Federal Reserve and its private owners wouldn't make billions off of interest payments. And so, the debt machine continued. The national debt is now over $34 trillion and rising by the second. The Fed prints trillions whenever it wants. Yet we're still told there's not enough money for infrastructure, healthcare, or fixing our crumbling economy. The truth is simple. The Federal Reserve is a parasite on the American people, and its entire purpose is to keep us in debt. And until people wake up and realize that the real rulers of the world aren't politicians, but bankers, nothing will change. The Federal Reserve is the greatest heist in American history, yet most people don't even know it happened. The only thing more shocking than the scam itself is how few people even question why a private banking cartel has total control over our money supply. And as we'll see in the next chapter, this financial control is just the first step in a much larger system of global domination, one that involves corporate influence, intelligence agencies, and economic warfare on a global scale. Stay tuned, because it only gets worse from here. Like and subscribe.
Alright, I've got it. Another video.
Welcome to Metanoia Mind.
This is from my old channel that got censored,
Transformation
and I had to
with
take
the
it down.
renewal of the mind. At Metanoia Minds, we delve deep into the hidden mission is to challenge conventional thinking and ignite a metamorphosis of understanding within each listener. Today, we embark on a profound journey that bridges the ancient and the modern, the prophetic and the technological, and the seen and the unseen. From the cryptic prophecies of Saint Malachi to the ethical quandaries posed by modern geopolitics and technological advancements, we'll explore how these threads intertwine to influence our present and potentially dictate our future. Our journey begins in the 12th century Ireland with Saint Malachi, a man whose life was a tapestry of devotion, miracles, and mystical experiences. Born in Armagh in 1094, Malachi became a priest at 25 and a bishop at only the age of 30. His pilgrimage to Rome in 1139 is said to have yielded a vision, a list of 112 cryptic phrases, each symbolizing a future pope from 1143 to the end of time. This manuscript, forgotten